Space, the final frontier. These are the podcasts of the podcast Enterprise. Its only mission to explore story structures, to analyze our favorite characters and plot lines, to boldly talk about what everyone has seen before. Welcome everyone to Podcast Enterprise, where we dissect stories from Star Trek the original series. I am Bala Ramadurai, and with me I have my co-host Parvati Ramkumar. Say hello, Parvati.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Podcast Enterprise. I'm so glad to have you here.
Okay, today is Barba Papa and his friends. No, it's Metamorphosis. What looks
Hmm.
dangerously close to Barba Papa, the cartoon. I think it was Dutch cartoon and was dubbed into English. I remember seeing it as a kid. And so this episode reminded me of that. Metamorphosis is the name of the episode. And with the summary, Parvati.
Okay, so basically, what we have is when this episode begins, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy they're taking Federation Commissioner Nancy Headford back to the Enterprise. She is sick with Sakuro's disease, a very rare and potentially fatal disease that she's got, and she must be treated for it. So Kirk is taking her back to the USS Enterprise. However, on the shuttlecraft Galileo gets accosted and they encounter a phenomenon that looks like a cloud of ionized hydrogen. And there's something seriously wrong with that encounter. And the Galileo is yanked to this planet into the Gamma Canaris region, and there they come to a planet. They meet a young man who calls himself Cochrane. He's lonely. He seems to be the only individual on that planet, which is a bit of a problem because there's no other life form apparently in that place. And then there's an issue with Nancy Hedford because she's sick. She needs treatment. And she also begins acting very erratically, and McCoy has to sedate her, I believe, because she needs to be kept under control so that the sickness does not worsen. Now, the issue is there is something else on this planet, Cochrane, some sort of sparkly mist. It can be pretty hostile. It does go out of its way to attack Kirk, Spock, and McCoy if it deems them to be a threat to Cochrane. And this is not an ideal situation. They're trapped here. They can't get out of there. Cochrane doesn't tell them much about this entity. There's a communication barrier. And eventually, what happens is they find out that this Cochrane, even though he looks young, several centuries old, and he is the creator of the warp drive that all the ships use for their interplanetary travel. And this mist like entity is what is keeping him alive. And it seems to care for him in some strange way. One thing leads to another, and Kirk decides to use a translator to try and figure out how to communicate with this entity. They find that this thing is female, it has feelings, and through the universal translator, it manages to communicate with them and tell them that she feels for Cochrane. She wants him to stay there. She doesn't want him to leave, but he, on the other hand, is going mad with loneliness. So there has to be compromise. And basically, that compromise comes in the form of Nancy Hedford, who still has the disease. She has to be cured. And this entity decides to possess Nancy Hedford, and then she stays there as a companion to Cochrane, and that's how this episode ends. Back to you.
The four-act structure starts off with the teaser. The trio of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are seen in the shuttle with a sick and very irritating commissioner. They are yanked off the course, and all Kirk has to offer at the end is sit back and enjoy the ride. The first act, they've already landed on some planet. It's an M class planet. The trio check it out. So they're trying to investigate what's up with this, why are they here, why have they been yanked off their course towards the Enterprise. So the end of the first act ends with them figuring out that there is a human there, not an alien but a human, and his name is not just Cochrane but Zephram Cochrane, and turns out that he's the inventor of the space warp. And he was presumed dead 150 years before. So he is close to 237 is should be his age right now. That's the conclusion they come up with. So that's the end of the first act. Figure out that there's a 237-year-old man. And the second act starts with Nancy's fever climbing and Cochrane telling his part of the story. This first time he's actually saying it properly, that he wanted to die in space. He just ended up here, almost dead. And then they also get to see what the entity is, the creature that's has kept him alive. So they don't know whether it's a pet or a lover or just symbiotic relationship. They have no clue. That's what they're trying to figure out in the second act. And at the end, somehow Kirk convinces Cochrane to go bait the entity, and the entity is baited, but unfortunately, it turns out to be much stronger and more violent than they could ever imagine. And it turns around and attacks Spock and Kirk, nearly choking them, with McCoy pleading. At the end of the second act, this is what happens. Spock and Kirk are almost choked, with Doc McCoy pleading with the entity to let them go. The third act starts with the same thing. Doc still continues to plead, and Cochrane goes on this meditation rampage. He's standing there waiting for the creature to come back, and that saves them. The creature leaves them and answers Cochrane's call, thus saving Kirk and Spock from dying. At the end of it, the third act is pretty long because there's a lot of back and forth, and they don't want to attack the creature. They want to talk to the creature, and a whole bunch of things happen. At the end, they realize that since they can talk, Cochrane realizes that that creature has been in love with him, but can't return love because she is not human. And so the only way that this can work out is if Nancy Hedford also dying. So there are few things going on. Nancy is dying. Two is Cochrane unwilling to accept that this is a lady in love with him, and the creature now feeling that, oh, I have to do something to make sure that something at all. And turns out to be that she is sacrificing herself somehow by becoming a human being or occupying Nancy's body. And that's what we see at the end of third act. Fourth act starts with McCoy checking Nancy and finding that medical miracle just happened, that Nancy is hale and healthy. All that stuff is gone off, the whatever disease she had. Nancy and this companion Baba Papa is in the same body. They occupy the same body, which is Nancy's body. Now there's a lot of things happening in fourth act. We can discuss that. And at the end of fourth act, Zephram Cochrane decides to stay back. They decide to leave Nancy slash companion back on the planet because she apparently cannot survive beyond the planet. So both of them stay back, and the trio now decide to leave the planet. There's not a big quip at the end. All Kirk says is, oh, now we have to find another woman to stop the war. Because Spock realizes there is a war to be stopped or somewhere. Everybody's worried, and then he says, oh, we'll find another woman to stop the war. And that's how the fourth act ends and the episode ends. What do you think of, what is it? What is this episode's name again? Metamorphosis. Okay.
True.
What do you think? What do you think about this episode, Bharati?
It was strange. I don't know what to think of it. It was so strange, and there was so much wrong with it that really put me off. You have this individual who's stranded on a planet. He's living there all by himself, supposedly, and you have this entity that is Spock observes that she seems to be made of electricity, and she doesn't communicate very well. She's very possessive, smothering, and quite violent. She keeps this man there for so long, and he doesn't even realize that this is an intelligent entity. He seems to think it's some sort of a genie type character. Has to.
That's a good observation. He's the inventor of the space warp. He can
Yes.
perceive all this. Apparently, he's a simpleton.
He is. It doesn't even strike him that these entities might have some semblance of intelligence, but no, there's nothing of that sort. He thinks it's just a misty, electrical, wish fulfilling thing that he can meditate and draw to him. And all she does is indulge him in the stupidest of ways by keeping him there, by drawing the Galileo there for some sort of companionship for him. And it's just so confusing, Bala. I don't get it. And then in the middle of all that, you have Nancy Hedford, who has got the Sakuro's disease. It's very serious. And then she's, on the one hand, she's completely obnoxious. As time goes by, she starts to die. And you see that she's so feverish and ill. And then the ending, what was that ending? I don't get it. It's
This
just,
is, it
yeah.
reminded me of The Cage. This is
Oh, yes.
The Cage modified and revamped into this story. So to me, that's what it was. So
Yeah.
except
It's,
that instead of disfiguring Veena,
yeah.
they made this guy all hale and healthy, and instead of
Young.
her
Yeah.
being a nobody, made
Huh.
him somebody. In fact, I think the same character is reprised in Star Trek First Contact.
Yes.
He comes
Yes.
back in that. Is played
Yeah.
by James Cromwell, the same character. I like the idea that an inventor is trapped there, but
Yes.
if he is
But
the
see,
inventor
yeah.
and he has everything, he would have done everything possible to. I don't think so. No, he says that he just wants to spend his last days in peace and he wanted to die in space. So it's sort of, I don't know.
He does say that, huh?
There's a lot of layers to the
Yes.
story. However, I think the Zephram Cochrane character
Mm.
turns out to be a very simple, babbling person
Yes.
who I couldn't. So
Yep.
that's
True.
my problem with that character.
I didn't get him either. He seemed a little too simple. For such a brilliant inventor, you would expect some sort of insight or thinking out of the box. He doesn't even realize that this alien entity might have some sort of an intelligence. Instead, he's just constantly using her like some sort of a genie. That is
Hmm.
also not a very intelligent act. At the same time, this strange romance type, I don't even want to call it a romance because eventually what Cochrane gets is some sort of a possessed woman. The whole thing just felt really strange, actually. This episode did make me a little bit uncomfortable. Like, for one thing, there was so many things happening, and then you have an inventor who acts like a bit of an imbecile, and then on the other hand, you have this entity and then possession that was really disturbing, Bala. What did you think about that?
I think this entity was muddled up. They want to portray that this is a female, okay, because they wanted to introduce the idea of a lover instead of a captor kind of a role.
Yes.
So I get it. They were going for that twist. However, when she's confronted with an opposing idea, she calls it illogical, and she cannot fathom death because I
Yeah.
guess she's the only entity on this entire planet. So
Yes.
she's not able to grasp death. So, in fact, the idea ceased to exist. I think it comes close to 18 times they've repeated cease to exist.
Ceased, yes, the
Uh,
man will cease to exist.
to exist, and she
Uh,
will cease to exist, and he will cease to exist, and they
Everything
will
will
cease to
cease to exist.
exist.
And by the
So,
time this is done, you will cease to exist because it's been since.
so I think this entity, in trying to give it a lot of layers,
Yeah.
they also, for me, it didn't work. The entity, it is not consistent. It's acting like a Vulcan sometimes. Sometimes it acts like a maniac
Yeah.
who's possessive about this person Cochrane,
Yes.
and will do any, and sometimes like a genie. That comparison also makes sense.
Yeah.
So what is this creature? Does it change? It doesn't seem to like any of these three people. It keeps attacking the ship. It attacks Spock without any reason. I didn't quite get this episode at all.
It's it's very difficult to empathize with the creature because, like you said, it's she's so inconsistent. You don't know whether she's plain insane with all the
Hmm.
attacks that she carries out, and then she even attempts to. I think in that one scene, she tries to kill the crew members, including Kirk. So,
Correct.
what exactly was she after? That isn't clear. And in a way, she reminds me of that alien creature in what is the name of that episode in the first, The Man Trap. So
Ah,
she's the
okay.
last of her species. There's nobody else. Now she's doing things to survive. Maybe she craves some sort of companionship, so she wants to keep this person there. And the
Hmm.
way she goes about it is just illogical, completely illogical. And I'm also kind of surprised that the universal translator actually worked with her and she was able to talk. That just came out of the blue, I feel. It strikes Kirk to use this thing on her, and then you hear that she has a female voice, and it synthesizes her voice, but it's a female, and I didn't really get it. It was such a strange experience watching this, and
There is a parallel in the teaser itself. You get
yeah,
a good glimpse of the entire episode. That itself was quite sudden and illogical. There's a sick woman. Where are they coming
yeah,
from? They're supposed to have stopped a war. Have they stopped it? Are they going to go? They're going to the end. They're not going to stop a war. So have they gone to pick up the Federation Commissioner? So they're
yeah.
probably going to pick her up. And suddenly they're yanked off the course. And she
Mm,
has this disease. She's not inoculated because the Federation has something. So it's all very confusing, and she's in the middle of an emergency. Kirk and Spock are in the middle of an emergency. The
yeah.
lights are different. Nothing is as usual, and
Mm,
she's concerned about is she wants to get back to the ship. So for
yeah.
me, a teaser itself didn't work. This is one of the few
True.
times that the teaser was a letdown.
True.
Probably a
And
good indicator also, and you need
of the
to
rest of
turn it
it.
off, see the entire episode.
That's true. I mean, they were remarkably cavalier about the fact that there's a war going to happen, and it's so you don't get that sense of fear. There's no urgency. And then you have Nancy Hedford. She is, of course, she is a Federation Commissioner. Okay, she's a woman with a lot of power, and she is just so incredibly obnoxious, constantly snapping at everybody. She meets this guy, Izza from Cochrane, and then immediately at loggerheads. And then,
Oh
it's
yeah, even that sarcastic remark, right? This guy offers his home.
yeah,
People are marooned, right? So if you think
true.
about it, they were yanked off course uh,
Yeah,
by that creature. That's another story. But they're
yeah.
yanked off course. They are landed here, and this guy is nice. He offers hospitality to these people. And what does she do? Oh, good. You're very astute. You offered because I need a bath. You can clearly see that. Oh,
Yes, the bath. How perceptive of you to notice that I need a bath. What kind of an
right.
exchange is that? I mean, it's
Exactly.
it's so hostile. And if she is in the position that she is, if she speaks like this to some sort of diplomatic party, she is going to cause a war. She's going to cause an intergalactic war, I swear.
Even if there wasn't one, I'm sure she will cause
She
one.
would cause it, yes, she would cause a war. She is so abrasive, so arrogant. And okay, maybe some of it you could attribute to the disease because apparently it does cause
Ah,
some sort of irritability and bad behavior. But it
hopefully it's
seems to
that.
me, but it also seems that she is endowed with a lot of bad temper so that it just comes out every now and then. And the disease is doing her no favors by making it worse. And so, like you said, if there is no war, she will cause a war. She's a very dangerous woman to have around.
She admits it. She says, I've never been loved or I've never returned the love either. At least the entity
Yeah.
had Zephram Cochrane. This one didn't even have that.
True, she has not the entity. That's another thing. Like you said in your summary, I mean, in the recounting of the four acts, what if people don't know if she is a pet or some sort of companion? So I don't think she did a very good job because if
Right.
we can misconstrue her for a pet, then
Hmm.
maybe her intelligence is a little dim as well. I
And for me, another thing that also bothered me a bit was
yeah.
when they land, right?
Uh-huh.
Spock says nothing wrong, nothing works. So it's like a tractor beam, is it? I
Yeah.
was trying to wrap
Yeah,
my
yeah, there was
mind
some
around
sort
that.
of it is something like a tractor beam, but it was a cloud of electrical impulses, and it's a strange composition.
And is that what Scotty picks up there? They lose the
It's
trail.
yeah, he that was all very vague. Maybe he picked up some of the electrical impulses this entity was giving out, but if it's not strong enough for the Enterprise to pick up, I just wonder how it brought down the Galileo so quickly. It was confusing, honestly. I
Correct.
don't know. What was the companion doing and what kind of power does she have over any ship that comes close to the planet? It wasn't made very clear, in my opinion.
And also, I don't know if this is true now because he has been lying to them from the word go. He said there's a damping field around the entire planet. So
Yeah.
is that true? Is that not? We don't know. That's another thing that was not answered from a
Yeah.
consistency point of view.
True. When he talks about the damping field and none of the devices working, you wonder whether this is the doing of the companion. How much power does she have? Is it something that is overreaching all across that planetoid, or is it already there? Nothing is made clear. You're left wondering what exactly is causing all of this confusion.
At the end, she just snaps her fingers and then everything is off
Yeah.
because now they're able to communicate with the ship. Now that she has from Cochrane and everything is settled, okay,
Yeah.
guys, now let's switch off this damping field.
That's
She's
it.
done.
And everything works to normal and they're allowed to leave quickly.
So
Yeah.
perhaps I think the emphasis was to weave this into a space love story and throw in
Maybe.
some sci-fi elements in it,
Yeah.
like an interracial commentary. The science was a bit left off there. The consistency in
Yeah.
terms of the concepts around, because I didn't see, usually any episode has one scientific concept at the heart of it. I did not really see that
Yep.
in this one. So my assumption is that they wanted a love story in a science fiction context. That's
Yeah.
why most of the elements that usually work in a Star Trek episode didn't work.
Yeah.
None of it worked.
Yeah. I think they've also, like we've seen in some of the other episodes, they try
Mm.
to do too much here because you have this war, which everybody seems to forget. You just have mentions of it in the beginning and in the end.
And
And
they quip about it. We need a war to
yeah,
be stopped. Fine,
somebody will
fine, we'll
stop
do it.
it.
Somebody will do
It's
it. Who know? Who
somebody
cares?
will do
I'm
it.
not going to
Somebody
do
will
it.
do it. And
Yeah.
it has to be a woman, so some woman will stop it. That's it. So you have that, and then you have this fact that somebody was kept alive for so long by
Mm,
an alien entity. You have the alien entity herself, who is so completely unpredictable. You
mm,
have all of these force fields going on
mm.
somewhere along, and then you have the romance, of course, which kind of overpowers everything else. Somewhere you lose the plot. It became very confusing because you're trying to understand whether this is of course you do see some sort of a warped love story, that's true, but then
Mm.
at the same time I was wondering, what was I watching? Am I trying to figure out what this entity is doing to the Enterprise, or how did Kirk suddenly manage to talk to her, and why is she speaking in this robotic voice? Okay, it could be because of the synthesizer, but there were too many elements and the romance wasn't strong enough to carry this forward. That's what I felt.
You know what? Inadvertently, you just renamed this episode. I love the
Yeah.
title that you gave, which
Yeah.
was Warped Love Story.
Yes. I like it. It makes more sense than
See,
Metamorphosis.
the warp is the space warp that
Yes,
Cochrane invented, and the
exactly.
fact that it's a completely warped love story. Oh,
Yes.
wow, fantastic! I love this title, new title.
We should rename it. Let's form a petition or something. Write a petition or something.
That's exactly what, because the times that this one goes back and forth in trying to up the ante on the love story part of it, that
Yeah.
it lost its way somewhere. So that's because I do appreciate the romantic elements in. I know it's difficult in sci-fi. Weaving a proper romantic story is
Yeah.
difficult because you're so focused on the science part of it that sometimes
Correct.
you lose that, but you
Yes.
need it because that's the humanizing the science
Exactly.
part of it.
Yes.
Some people do it very well. I think we will talk about it in the other podcast, is the expanse, right? They get
Okay.
it right. And even
Yeah.
in Star Trek episodes, some of them, for example, that what's her name, Spock's flame, oh, what's her, Lola,
Oh yeah.
Lolita, I forget her name, Layla,
Right. Yes.
So that one worked for me, really worked.
Yeah.
So that was in the context of a science fiction. There was a lot of commentary around it. Now here they didn't look at that. 150 years. This guy, he talks about boredom. 150 years leading life just like that, and
Yeah.
suddenly you needed companions. 150th year over. 150 years up. No, I need companionship.
Yes, he's been keeping calendars apparently.
So it's very lopsided in one sense, like many other episodes. It has the elements. We understand where the screenwriter Gene Coon is going with this. But I feel, and I think you also agree with me, is that probably lost the plot somewhere.
Yes, it did. It did. And the other thing that didn't quite make sense as far as his romance was concerned is that Cochrane is able to summon this companion to him, and she kind of envelops him, doesn't she? There is some sort of mental communication between them, and he still didn't realize what she is. That takes an incredible amount of denseness.
So he's been doing this for 150 years now,
Yes,
not
and
not yesterday or day before.
true, and he still thinks she's just a genie-like entity with no intelligence. He could not have invented the warp drive, Balanjar. I just don't get it.
So I think in this entire episode, Kirk
Yeah,
and Spock are the only ones who are true to their character.
correct.
McCoy a little bit is
A little
concerned
bit,
about
yeah.
his patient. These two are the only ones who are sticking to that, saying, okay, captivity bad. We need to figure out a way to get it. Whether
True.
entity lives, dies, I don't care. At one point, even Spock says, "Oh, would I think it'll be better if now that we're able to communicate, it'll be better to study what's the history and all that." He's showing his intent
True,
on
that scientific
furthering the
bent of
cause of
mind.
science. He's curious. He wants to know more about this. And
Yes.
Kirk just dismisses him, saying, "Hey, it's not the time for that. I'm trying to get us out of here,
I know.
or we're going to be holed up here for a really
I
long
know.
time."
If you're trying to escape and you want to sit here and study this place, that's not going to happen.
So these two are the only characters who are true to themselves, true to their nature, and they're
Correct.
trying to do something productive. That's the part I really enjoyed in this episode.
True, Kirk is constantly trying to find ways to get them out. He has to come up with new things, to think out of the box, and at the same time, he's almost killed by this entity.
Yeah, he really got choked in doing that, in trying to get them out of there. And McCoy did his part. He did plead all the same. He says, "Oh, see like this.
Initially,
How is that illogical?"
true. Yeah, his pleading was the most, unimpressive pleading I've heard, but it was still pleading. So maybe the creature is not used to it.
I am in command now.
Yes, maybe. And so maybe he's thinking, maybe you should kill them, then I can take over the Enterprise and turn it into some sort of floating hospital
So
specimen.
just call Scotty back and
Yeah,
says, "Scotty, I'm so sorry to tell you that those two guys conked off. Now I am in command now."
I know. You just have to say they're dead, Scotty. That's it. So, yeah.
Naughty McCoy, you. No,
So,
poor thing.
what about Nancy Hedford, Bala? She was so abrasive and so rude. And
uh,
something that really bothered me about her and her eventual merging with this entity, and then you have Cochrane saying that she was so abrasive and so rude to him throughout this entire episode. Towards the end, he's mesmerized by her.
so there's a part that attracts him because that's the
Yeah,
companion, and
true.
then there's a part that repels him, which is Nancy, right? This is a person who is taken care of me, who saved me and all that. This is a person who refused hospitality from me. I better stay away from her. So it's like a love hate thing, I think.
Could be, but he never showed any affection for the companion. It was all one sided. And
Right.
he didn't respect this entity as a sentient creature. When he realized female, quote unquote female, then he started rethinking his life's choices. But up to that point, he was pretty rude to it and kept summoning her and expecting her to do his bidding, all because he never took her seriously. I don't think that that's going to turn into something romantic so quickly, especially since she's inhabiting the body of somebody he possibly despises. And
I can think of
yeah,
a parallel to this, Parvati. Is this
yeah,
movie called Her? So this is Joaquin Phoenix in a futurish setting where he falls in love with this AI, right?
yeah,
So she has no form, and he keeps talking to her, and it's a she. So it's
yeah.
given a lady characteristics. Slow and steady, they keep talking. She is helping him more than he is helping her,
Ha, ha, ha.
and somehow he realizes at the end that she is not only loyal to him, but she is an AI to everybody, every man and woman on this planet. She is that companion. So
Yeah.
he then sort of starts moving away from her. But
Mm.
it sort of has a parallel with that for me, this
Yeah.
relationship with companion. And in that movie also, to, I don't know, physically satisfy him, she hires somebody and she is talking to her through her AI route and also talking to him through the AI route. So
Yeah.
I don't know. That's the parallel I could think of
Kind of
when we are
in reverse
discussing.
here, isn't it? Because when she a little bit in he's attracted, he wasn't attracted to the entity,
Correct.
and then towards the end, when he finds that she has a physical form, a gender, a female gender, then he goes to the other extreme.
Mm,
So it's an absolute change of personality almost, because he was talking about leaving the planet and he wants to get out of there, and he doesn't take the entity seriously. Sometimes he even thinks of her as a nuisance, and then towards the end all of that comes around and he wants to stay there because she has this form, and then he is attracted to this form. She is basically two individuals in one body, and one
mm,
individual is an alien, the other is human. I do think there might be some sort of a clash of personality because it is a possession. It is an alien
correct.
possession. It's almost like there's a ghost, that Nancy Hedford, and she is possessed. And how do you know that this is going to be a stable symbiotic partnership? There's no proof of that.
Actually, she invades her body, right? So that's another
Correct.
thing. If the intelligent being were to acknowledge boundaries, you should seek the permission of the person who is hosting you. That's a clear violation right there. But of
Mm.
course, who's going to question her? I mean,
Yeah.
everybody's already accepted it, and the only guy who was originally against this whole idea was from Cochrane. He said,
Yeah.
"Don't you have decency or morality? Is this what the future looks like?" And Spock calls it a parochial attitude. McCoy says, "Oh, why are you running away from love?" Nancy says that.
Yeah.
Everybody's suddenly putting him off. However, when the alien is invading Nancy's body,
Yeah.
this guy is clearly against it initially.
Mm.
Shouldn't he be given the choice? And suddenly, okay, of course he does take the stance. He's going to stay back. He is ready to go, but now he wants to stay back because she'll be all lonely. A whole bunch of things. Third and fourth act for me was where it started going all over the place.
I mean, for me, especially towards the end, when the entity invaded Nancy's body and possessed her, I actually started feeling a little bit of sympathy for Nancy. She's possessed by an alien creature. The disease has been cured, but is she a passive witness to what's happening around her while this creature controls her body? It's quite unsettling. She never really showed much affection for this Zephyr Cochrane in the first place. So it might, if she had her personality being fully conscious while this alien creature was possessing her, she might have been horrified, and it is a clear violation of, like you said, her personal space.
So if she were interested in, once that you're here, companion says that your aging process has stopped. But
Mm.
however, Nancy is clearly shown as dying, right? So that for
Yes,
me is
correct.
another thing that didn't make sense. Then in that case, the logical way is to just open up the communication, the Enterprise come in, and she'd be cured in no time because they have all the
Correct.
facilities there. So if she were serious and intelligent,
Yeah.
this would have been the easiest way out, rather than
Yeah.
trying to occupy the body and give all sorts of vague excuses. Now she is trying to somehow get into the good books of Cochrane.
Sakuro's disease, just get possessed and you're cured. All.
And is that irreversible? That the
Correct.
moment she occupies, then how did she possess her in the first place? If she was able to figure that out, couldn't you figure a way out also?
Correct. I mean, she just possesses and she loses all her immortality and her great superpowers, and it's permanent. And the disease is gone. That and how did such an alien see? Her composition seems to be mostly of electrical impulses, but if she wouldn't be able to enter a human body. It would go into seizures. How did she do it? The entire scene was so bizarre. I could not
Hmm.
wrap my head around it.
He says, "You are beautiful, part of me understands, part of me doesn't." And they go on a date night. The captain says, "I'm going to mind my ship and take care
And
of
there's
important
some
things with
wars
it."
will fit.
And they want to grow old together. He's going to plant a fig tree, and all that is going to happen. Okay.
Happily ever after, except for the
Ah,
war, which we don't know anything
yeah.
about.
So, is there anything you like or dislike in this? Is there
Yes.
anything you liked in this episode?
Okay, I think I must have liked about 30 seconds when they found that lone man living on this planetoid. And I was intrigued and I thought, that's very interesting. But that dissipated pretty quickly. And
Okay.
I mean, there was so much potential with that alien creature, and they blew it, is my opinion. And
Ah,
I,
okay.
I kind of wish they'd eased up a little bit on the romance or made it a little smoother. That's my
Hmm.
opinion. So there was a lot of potential. I like the idea that it is possible for an alien and a human to. This creature is extremely alien, and it's possible for two intelligent creatures that are so different to get together. But
Hmm.
I'm not sure I really got or I didn't really appreciate or the execution of it. It was not as well done as it could have been. What about you, Bala?
I think what was missing was probably us trying to, as audience, empathizing with one of the characters. Frankly, Cochrane was not likable. The companion is passable. Nancy definitely not. So there
Yeah,
is no, in building a romance like this, you need either the premise of the romance likable or one of the characters likable, and
correct,
the other one can sort of fit in. I did not find appealing in this, and
correct.
that's why I
Yeah.
couldn't relate to this romance.
It also didn't help, Bala, that everybody was so completely inconsistent. You'd expect you would expect some sort of consistency in the characterization, but that didn't exist. They keep going from being angry to being violent to being
Hmm,
abrasive, and then
hmm,
at the end it's all lovey-dovey. It was too much. They go from one extreme to the other too quickly, and there wasn't any build-up for it. So
hmm.
that also made it a little hard to like any of them.
So what I really liked was the idea of a universal translator. That was interesting.
Yes.
By the way, did you notice that was the same device used by Gorn in Arena?
Ah,
It
that
is
is
the
so interesting.
that is the exact same device.
They stole it from the Gorns.
That is quite possible.
Yes.
So they just kept it before returning it.
Yeah.
Spock just opened it up and rigged it to read the companion also. And what I found funny more than liking it was when Spock was attacked, he just threw himself without the creature actually
Yeah.
attacking himself. He- and when they leave him, he's turned towards his left. But when
Yeah.
McCoy finds him, he's towards his right. So, so Spock's continuing to throw himself. I think even when the creature is not attacking him,
Yeah, yeah.
I found that part funny. No doubt, cease to exist and continue. This is amazing. How many times can he keep saying it? I think, was it the third act? Towards the
Yes.
third act, they keep repeating. Every other dialogue had ceased to exist in it.
You know something, Bala? This actually reminds me of an old comic I read, and there was this little boy who was
Hmm.
jealous of another boy who won an essay contest. And his essay was, one day my dog Moti ran away, and I went out and called Moti, 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 Moti some 500 times. So that
And that
your script just say the same things again and again, like cease to exist.
cease to
Yes.
exist or continue, right?
Yep.
The one scene that I genuinely liked in this, apart
Yeah.
from the universal translator, was that dupatta scene. So they show that basically, what's her name? Nancy holds up when the alien possesses Nancy. He holds up this dupatta like her scarf,
Yep.
in with Cochrane behind. So the
Yes.
first time she's able to see him without that veil kind of a thing, or detect, I don't know, because it's just a bunch of electrical impulses and some cloud. This is probably the first time she sees him without that. So it was
Ah.
giving us that. I found that nice. So
Of potential, but as we've seen in some other episodes, and I've been saying, it did try to do too much. And maybe if they had just stuck to the romance and kept parts of the science working, it might have
correct.
been more coherent.
We've talked about the many things that didn't work. One
Yeah.
more we can add to it is that
Mm,
there's an absence of a real drama or some kind of
correct.
tense situation, right?
Yes.
The Possibly the only tense situation came when Spock was attacked and all the
Ah,
controls were gone.
correct.
So, or these guys choking and McCoy pleading,
In
right?
McCoy really blew the moment by pleading.
So I don't think there was real drama or tension to that
There
third act or
wasn't.
the fourth act in any other episode that really works. Higher rated episode in Star Trek, you'll
Yeah,
find that third act really pushes you to the edge. This time,
correct.
the stakes are so high that
Yeah,
if they didn't act, they're just doomed, or
they're doomed.
it's
And it's, Kirk at
something
that
like that.
point has to think out of the box and make that one decision that will save them.
Adapting the universal
Yeah,
translator. That was it.
that's it. I mean, that was his grand plan. And they found that the entity is female.
All right. So hypothetically, if
Huh.
Gene Kuhn were here in our podcast, what would you
Yeah.
ask him to change or to explain?
First off, please get rid of those repetitive faces like cease to exist. There were too many things happening, and if you wanted to tell a romance or love story, maybe focus on that so that we can get a better idea of what an alien and human relationship might be like.
Hmm.
Instead, you had to go the possession route, hadn't you? Because that was the strangest part of the entire episode for me, and it really bothered me to see that this person who was just a few moments before dying
Hmm.
suddenly wakes up with this new entity in her body. And talk about violation of personal space and disrespect for her person. She may be abrasive, but you can't do that.
Right.
So yeah, it was strange. So maybe give the whole script a relook. What about
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
Bella?
I had two questions. Why does Cochrane not want his story out there after everything, right? So, what's the problem
Yeah.
in revealing that Zephram Cochrane is alive after all these years? Would that mean a buzz of paparazzi is going to come there and invade his privacy?
So
So,
it was a strange thing.
and Kirk, of course, Kirk being Kirk, obliges. He says, okay, your privacy is important. We'll keep it that way. But I don't
Hmm.
see why that had to be a secret. And the second question
Exactly.
was,
Yeah, that was it.
now what
Hmm.
happens to Nancy as a person? She's a Federation Commissioner.
Yes.
And what would the report read? Is she decides to stay back and we have fired her off the job? Or what happens to that part? So those are my questions to
Yes.
Gene Kuhn. Analysis of the episode. I enjoyed it definitely. And we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you and bye.
Bye, everyone.
That brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening to the podcast Enterprise. Please do share your reviews with us and please share this podcast with any of your writing friends or trickies. Live long and prosper.